The hum of the refrigerator was the loudest sound in the house. It was a familiar sound, one that usually brought a sense of comfort, of normalcy. Tonight, however, it seemed to mock me, its steady drone a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside me. Anya was supposed to be home by now. She'd texted earlier, a quick message about a last-minute meeting running late, something about a new client pitch. It was a common occurrence, these late nights. Anya was driven, ambitious. I admired that about her, or at least I used to. Now I just felt a gnawing unease, a prickling sensation that something was off. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Anya was a successful woman, her career demanding. Late nights were part of the package. But the feeling persisted, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I wandered through the house, each room a reminder of our life together. The framed photos on the mantelpiece, our wedding, our anniversary trips, moments of shared laughter and joy. They seemed like a lifetime ago, a different reality. I picked up a photo from our trip to the coast last summer. Anya, her face radiant, the sun glinting off her hair. I remembered the way she'd laughed as a wave crashed over us, soaking us both to the bone. A genuine, carefree laugh. Had I imagined that happiness? Had it all been a carefully constructed facade? I set the photo down, my fingers tracing the cool glass. The house felt empty, despite all the familiar objects, the furniture we'd chosen together, the artwork we'd collected. It was Anya's absence that created this void, this suffocating silence. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:37 p.m. Later than usual, even for Anya. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. "I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back," her recorded voice chirped. The cheerfulness in her tone felt like a slap in the face. I hung up, a wave of anger washing over me. Where was she? What was she doing? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. I paced the living room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. I needed to do something, anything, to distract myself from the growing dread. I considered going out for a walk, but the darkness outside seemed to mirror the darkness inside me. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hand trembled, spilling some on the counter. I wiped it up, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I felt like I was losing control, like the carefully constructed order of my life was crumbling around me. I needed answers, I needed to know what was happening. But most of all, I needed Anya to come home. The digital clock on the bedside table glared at me, 11:42 p.m. Still no word from Anya. The knot in my stomach had tightened into a hard, painful lump. I tried calling her again, several times, but her phone remained stubbornly silent. Each unanswered call felt like a tiny hammer blow, chipping away at my composure. I told myself she was probably just busy, that the meeting had run longer than expected, that her phone had died. But these rationalizations felt flimsy, like trying to patch a gaping hole with a band-aid. A sense of dread, cold and clammy, had settled over me. It was more than just worry. It was a deep, visceral feeling that something was terribly wrong. I got out of bed, my legs feeling heavy and unsteady. I wandered into the living room, drawn to the window. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the empty street. I watched as a lone car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the darkness. Where was she? What could possibly be keeping her this late? I replayed the events of the day in my mind, searching for any clue, any sign that might explain her absence. Everything had seemed normal, routine. We'd had breakfast together, talked about our plans for the weekend. She'd seemed normal. But now, as I sifted through my memories, I noticed subtle things I'd overlooked at the time. Anya's unusually quiet demeanor at breakfast, the way she'd avoided my gaze, the slight tremor in her hand as she'd poured her coffee. Had these been signs? Had I been too blind to see them? I felt a wave of self-blame wash over me. Had I been so focused on my own work, my own life, that I'd neglected her? Had I somehow driven her away? I thought about our relationship the way it had been in the beginning. The passion, the excitement, the feeling that we were inseparable. Over time, those feelings had faded, replaced by a comfortable routine. Had that routine become a trap? Had we drifted so far apart that we'd become strangers? I sank onto the sofa, my head in my hands. I felt lost, confused, utterly helpless. I didn't know what to do, who to turn to. I was alone in the silence of the empty house, my thoughts swirling like a storm. The only certainty was the gnawing fear that Anya wasn't coming back. Sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness amplifying the turmoil in my mind. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I imagined Anya in countless scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Had she been in an accident? Was she hurt? Or was it something else? Something far worse? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of discovering something devastating, something that would shatter the foundation of my life. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The silence, the emptiness, was suffocating me. I needed to do something, anything, to break free from the grip of fear and uncertainty. I got out of bed, my body aching from a night of restless tossing and turning. I showered, dressed, and went downstairs, my movements mechanical, devoid of any real purpose. I made a pot of coffee, but the aroma, usually so comforting, did nothing to soothe my nerves. I poured myself a cup, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My appetite was gone, replaced by a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I decided to go for a drive. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, the cool morning air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the house. I got into my car and started the engine, the rumble of the motor a welcome distraction from the silence. I drove aimlessly, letting the road guide me, my mind racing with unanswered questions. I found myself driving towards Anya's office. I wasn't sure why. Perhaps I was hoping to find some clue, some explanation for her absence. Or perhaps I simply needed to be near something connected to her, even if it was just a building. I parked across the street from her office building and sat in my car, watching the early morning activity. Employees began to arrive, their faces bright and eager, ready to start their day. I watched them, feeling a pang of envy. They had their lives, their routines, their sense of normalcy. I had nothing but uncertainty and fear. I thought about going inside, asking her colleagues if they'd seen her, if they knew where she was. But I hesitated. What if she was simply late? What if she walked in while I was there, looking for her? The embarrassment would be unbearable. I decided to wait. I sat in my car, watching the building, my eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for Anya to appear. But she never did. Hours crawled by. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. The initial flurry of activity around Anya's office building subsided as the workday settled into its rhythm. Still, there was no sign of her. My hope, already fragile, began to dwindle. Doubt, like a venomous snake, coiled around my heart, whispering insidious suggestions. What if Anya didn't want to be found? What if she had deliberately disappeared? The thought was unbearable, a knife twisting in my gut. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, even if they were painful. I got out of the car, my legs stiff from sitting for so long. I crossed the street and entered the building, my heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and determination. The receptionist, a young woman with a friendly smile, greeted me. I asked for Anya, trying to keep my voice steady. The receptionist's smile faltered. She told me Anya hadn't come in that day, hadn't called, hadn't emailed. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I mumbled something about a misunderstanding and stumbled out of the building, the receptionist's concerned gaze burning into my back. Back in my car, I felt utterly lost. Anya's absence was no longer just a worry. It was a gaping hole in my reality. Where could she be? What could have happened? The questions circled in my mind, relentless and unanswered. As I sat there, numb with shock and despair, a glint of metal caught my eye. It was a small, silver object, tucked under the passenger seat. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against its smooth surface. It was a USB drive. I stared at it, a strange premonition creeping over me. Where had it come from? I didn't recognize it. Had Anya left it in the car? But why? And why hadn't I noticed it before? Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of unease, prompted me to take the drive home. I needed to see what was on it. Perhaps it held the answers I was so desperately seeking. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something I wasn't prepared to face. Back home, the silence of the house pressed in on me, heavier than before. The USB drive felt cold and heavy in my hand. I hesitated for a moment, a strange reluctance holding me back. What if I didn't want to know what was on it? What if it revealed something I couldn't handle? But the need for answers, the desperate yearning to understand Anya's disappearance, overrode my fear. I went to my study, the room where I spent countless hours working, escaping into the world of code and algorithms. Now, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could confront the truth, no matter how painful. I plugged the USB drive into my computer, my hands trembling slightly. A folder icon appeared on the screen, labeled simply Anya. I clicked on it, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, a single video file. I double-clicked, and the video began to play. The first few seconds showed a nondescript hotel room. Then, the door opened, and Anya walked in. My breath caught in my throat. She was dressed differently than usual, more provocatively. Her hair was styled, her makeup carefully applied. She looked different. Then, another figure entered the frame. A man. Tall, well-built, with a confident swagger. I didn't recognize him at first. But as he turned towards the camera, my blood ran cold. It was Mark, Anya's colleague, the one she'd been spending so much time with lately. The scene that unfolded before my eyes was like a punch to the gut. Anya and Mark, embracing, kissing, their passion raw and undeniable. I watched, frozen in horror, as they shed their clothes and fell onto the bed. The sounds of their lovemaking filled the room. Each moan, each gasp, a dagger to my heart. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Anya, my wife, the woman I loved, was cheating on me, with her colleague, in a sleazy hotel room. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt sick, dizzy, my stomach churning. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break something. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare. The video continued, a relentless chronicle of their betrayal. I watched, unable to tear my eyes away, as they explored each other's bodies. Their intimacy a cruel mockery of my own love for Anya. Each touch, each kiss, was a betrayal, a violation of the trust one had placed in her. Finally, the video ended. The screen went black, leaving me in the darkness of my study, the only sound the hum of the computer. I sat there for a long time, the images from the video seared into my mind. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer cruelty of it all washed over me in waves. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating in a sea of pain. And then, something shifted inside me. The pain gave way to anger, a cold, hard rage that burned through my veins. I had been betrayed, humiliated, discarded. But I wouldn't let her get away with it. I would have my revenge. The rage that consumed me was a living thing, a fiery beast clawing at my insides, demanding to be released. I had always considered myself a rational man, a man of logic and control. But now, all sense of reason had evaporated, replaced by a primal urge for vengeance. Anya had shattered my world, betrayed my trust in the most profound way imaginable. And I would make her pay. But how? The question hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. I couldn't simply confront her, unleash my fury in a torrent of accusations and recriminations. That would be too easy, too fleeting. No, I needed something more, something that would cut deep, something that would leave a lasting scar. I thought about the video, the evidence of her betrayal. I could expose her, humiliate her, destroy her reputation. But that wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't undo the pain she had inflicted, the sense of violation that gnawed at my soul. I needed a plan, a strategy that would systematically dismantle her life, piece by piece. I would use her own weapons against her, her ambition, her vanity, her carefully constructed facade. I would expose her secrets, undermine her relationships, and shatter her dreams. I would make her regret the day she ever crossed me. The first step was to gather information. I needed to know everything about her affair, every detail, every lie. I started by monitoring her phone, intercepting her calls and messages. I installed spyware on her computer, tracking her every online activity. I followed her, discreetly, observing her movements, her interactions with Mark. The more I learned, the more my anger grew. Their affair was not a casual fling, a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a full-blown relationship, complete with secret rendezvous, whispered promises, and stolen moments of passion. They had built a world of their own, a world that excluded me, a world built on lies and deceit. I watched them unseen as they met in restaurants, in hotels, in parks. I listened to their conversations, their laughter, their declarations of love. Each encounter was a fresh wound, a reminder of my own pain and humiliation. But I also learned about their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, their secrets. Mark, it turned out, was married with a young child. His affair with Anya was a risky gamble, one that could cost him everything. Anya, for all her confidence and ambition, was deeply insecure, craving validation and approval. These were the cracks in their armor, the points of weakness I could exploit. I would use their own secrets against them, turning their love into a weapon, their passion into a source of pain and destruction. The plan began to take shape in my mind, a dark and intricate web of revenge. I would start slowly, subtly, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion. I would manipulate events, create misunderstandings, and sow discord. I would watch as their relationship unraveled, as their trust eroded, as their happiness turned to ashes. And then, when they were at their most vulnerable, I would strike. I would expose their affair, shatter their illusions, and leave them to face the consequences of their actions. I would have my revenge, slow and agonizing, a fitting punishment for their betrayal. My plan was a delicate dance, a carefully choreographed sequence of moves designed to maximize the impact of my revenge. I had to be patient, methodical, and above all, discreet. Anya couldn't suspect a thing. She had to believe that her life was falling apart on its own, a consequence of her own bad choices. I started with her work. Anya was a rising star in her company, a talented marketing executive with a bright future. I knew how much her career meant to her, how much she valued her success. And so I set out to destroy it. I began subtly undermining her projects, planting seeds of doubt about her competence and reliability. I would accidentally delete crucial files, misplace important documents, and introduce errors into her presentations. I would make sure that her ideas were dismissed, her contributions overlooked, her efforts thwarted. At first, the effects were subtle. A missed deadline here, a botched presentation there. But gradually, the cracks began to show. Anya's confidence wavered. Her enthusiasm dimmed. She started making mistakes, her work suffered, and her colleagues began to question her abilities. I watched her unraveling with a cold satisfaction. She was losing control, her carefully constructed image of success crumbling around her. The stress was taking its toll, her once vibrant energy replaced by a growing anxiety. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to isolate her, to cut her off from her support network. I started spreading rumors about her, whispering insinuations about her competence and her character. I hinted at improprieties, suggesting that she was using her position for personal gain. The rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by envy and resentment. Anya's colleagues, once friendly and supportive, now eyed her with suspicion. Her friends, sensing trouble, began to distance themselves. She was alone, adrift in a sea of doubt and hostility. And then I delivered the final blow. I anonymously leaked information about her affair with Mark to her boss. The news spread through the company like a shockwave. Anya, once a rising star, was now a liability, a scandal waiting to happen. She was called into a meeting with her boss and HR. I can only imagine the humiliation, the shame, the desperation she must have felt as she tried to explain herself, to defend her actions. But it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming, the damage irreparable. She was given two options: resign or be fired. She chose to resign, her career in tatters, her reputation in ruins. I watched from the shadows as she walked out of the office building, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. She looked defeated, broken, and I felt a surge of triumph. The first phase of my plan was complete. Anya's career, her source of pride and identity, was gone. She was vulnerable, exposed, ripe for the next stage of my revenge. Anya's professional downfall was only the beginning. I knew that her social circle, her network of friends and acquaintances, was another source of strength and support. I had to dismantle that as well, to leave her completely isolated, alone with her guilt and shame. I started with Mark. He was the weak link, the one with the most to lose. He had a wife, a child, a reputation to protect. I knew that if I could expose his affair, his life would come crashing down around him. I began by sending anonymous emails to his wife, hinting at his infidelity. I included subtle clues, details that only someone with intimate knowledge of their affair would know. I watched as his wife grew suspicious, her trust eroded by my carefully planted seeds of doubt. Then I escalated my campaign. I sent her photos of Mark and Anya together, caught in intimate moments. I forwarded her copies of their emails, their text messages, their love letters. I painted a picture of their affair, a vivid and damning portrait of their betrayal. Mark's wife, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, was devastated. She confronted him, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. He denied everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. He confessed, his voice choked with shame and regret. Their marriage imploded. His wife filed for divorce, taking their child with her. Mark's world, once stable and secure, was shattered. He lost his family, his home, his reputation. He was ostracized by his friends, shunned by his colleagues. He became a pariah, a symbol of infidelity and betrayal. Anya, witnessing Mark's downfall, was horrified. She realized the extent of my power, the ruthlessness of my revenge. She tried to reach out to him, to offer him support, but he rebuffed her. He blamed her for everything, for his ruined life, for his shattered dreams. Their affair, once a source of passion and escape, now became a source of pain and recrimination. They turned on each other, their love curdling into bitterness and resentment. I watched their relationship implode, their bond of trust broken beyond repair. With Mark out of the picture, I turned my attention to Anya's friends. I spread rumors about her, whispering tales of her infidelity, her manipulative behavior, her callous disregard for others. I painted her as a social climber, a user, a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Her friends, once loyal and supportive, began to question their relationship with her. They saw her in a new light, their perception colored by my carefully crafted lies. They distanced themselves, their warmth replaced by suspicion and distrust. Anya, sensing their withdrawal, was bewildered and hurt. She tried to defend herself, to explain her actions, but her words fell on deaf ears. No one believed her anymore. She was alone, isolated, cut off from the world she had once known. I watched her isolation grow, her social circle shrink, her support network crumble. She was like a tree, its roots severed, its branches withered, slowly dying from lack of nourishment. And I, the unseen gardener, tended to her demise, ensuring that she would never recover. Having stripped Anya of her career and social standing, I turned my attention to her finances. I knew that money was a source of security and independence for her, a safety net in a world that was rapidly becoming hostile. I intended to take that away from her, to leave her feeling vulnerable and exposed. I started by subtly manipulating our joint accounts. I would make small, unauthorized transfers, siphoning off funds into a separate account that Anya knew nothing about. I would forge her signature on checks, withdraw cash without her knowledge, and create false expenses to cover my tracks. At first, the discrepancies were small, easily overlooked. But as time went on, the amounts grew larger, the irregularities more blatant. Anya, already stressed and distracted, began to notice that something was amiss. She questioned me about the missing funds, her voice laced with suspicion. I feigned ignorance, playing the role of the concerned husband, baffled by the financial irregularities. I suggested that perhaps she had simply forgotten about certain expenses, or that she had miscalculated her budget. I offered to help her review our finances, to get to the bottom of the mystery. Anya, desperate for answers, agreed. We sat down together, poring over bank statements, credit card bills, and investment reports. I watched as she grew increasingly frustrated and confused, her anxiety mounting with each unexplained transaction. I subtly steered her away from the truth, planting false leads and red herrings. I suggested that perhaps she had been a victim of identity theft, or that there had been an error at the bank. I encouraged her to contact the authorities, to file a report, to launch an investigation. Anya, caught in a web of my deception, followed my suggestions. She spent hours on the phone with banks, credit card companies, and government agencies. She filled out forms, submitted documents, and answered endless questions. But the more she investigated, the more confused she became. The trail I had laid was intricate and misleading, designed to lead her astray. Meanwhile, I continued to drain our joint accounts, transferring funds, forging signatures, and creating false expenses. Anya's financial security, once a source of comfort and stability, was rapidly eroding. She was losing control of her money, her resources dwindling with each passing day. The stress of the financial turmoil took a heavy toll on her. She was constantly worried, her mind racing with unanswered questions. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything but the looming financial crisis. I watched her unraveling with a cold satisfaction. She was losing everything: her career, her friends, her money. She was alone, vulnerable, and desperate. And I, the architect of her downfall, reveled in her misery. The time was coming for the final act of my revenge, the moment I had been waiting for. Soon, I would reveal myself, expose my machinations, and watch as Anya's world came crashing down around her. Anya was a shadow of her former self. The vibrant, confident woman I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by a hollow shell, haunted by anxiety and fear. Her eyes, once bright and sparkling, were now dull and lifeless. Her smile, once infectious and warm, was now a rare and fleeting gesture. She moved through the house like a ghost, her footsteps silent, her presence barely perceptible. She spent most of her time in her room, the door closed, the curtains drawn. I could hear her pacing back and forth, her restless energy a constant reminder of her inner turmoil. Sometimes, I would stand outside her door, listening to her muffled sobs, her whispered pleas for answers, for relief. A part of me, the part that still remembered the love I had once felt for her, ached with pity. But that part was quickly silenced by the cold, hard voice of revenge. I knew that my plan was working, that Anya was suffering the consequences of her betrayal. But it wasn't enough. I needed to see her pain, to witness her despair, to savor her downfall. I started leaving her anonymous messages. Cryptic notes slipped under her door, whispered threats on her voicemail. I hinted at my knowledge of her affair, my awareness of her secrets, my control over her life. The messages were designed to unsettle her, to sow seeds of paranoia and fear. I wanted her to question her sanity, to doubt her perception of reality. I wanted her to feel like she was being watched, followed, manipulated. Anya's anxiety escalated with each new message. She became jumpy, easily startled, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She started seeing shadows in the corners, hearing whispers in the wind. She was losing her grip on reality, her mind teetering on the brink of collapse. I watched her descent into madness with a detached fascination. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, the inevitable outcome both horrifying and mesmerizing. I knew that I was responsible for her suffering, that I was the architect of her destruction. But I couldn't stop. The thirst for revenge was too strong, the desire for retribution too consuming. One evening, as I was leaving another anonymous note under her door, I heard a noise from inside the room. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Anya was talking to herself, her voice low and urgent. "Who's there?" she whispered. "Who's doing this to me?" I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to answer her, to reveal myself, to gloat over her misery. But I restrained myself. The time wasn't right yet. I slipped the note under the door and retreated to my study, leaving Anya alone with her fear and paranoia. I sat at my desk, the glow of the computer screen illuminating my face. I opened a new document and began to type. "Anya," I wrote, "I know what you did." The words hung in the air, a promise and a threat. Soon, very soon, I would reveal myself, and Anya would face the full force of my wrath. The game was entering its final stage. Anya, stripped of her career, her friends, her financial security, and her peace of mind, was teetering on the edge of a complete breakdown. The once proud and confident woman was now a fragile, broken shell, haunted by fear and paranoia. It was time to tighten the screws, to increase the pressure, to push her over the edge. I escalated my campaign of psychological warfare, using every tool at my disposal to torment her. I hacked into her email account, sending messages to her contacts that made her appear unstable and unreliable. I created fake social media profiles in her name, posting inflammatory comments and embarrassing photos. I even impersonated her online, engaging in bizarre and inappropriate conversations with strangers. Anya, already isolated and distrustful, found herself further alienated from the few people who still remained in her life. Her friends and family, bombarded with strange and disturbing messages, began to question her sanity. They distanced themselves, fearing that she was becoming a danger to herself and others. I watched as Anya's world contracted, her support network shrinking to nothing. She was alone, trapped in a nightmare of my creation. Her once vibrant life had become a desolate wasteland, devoid of joy, connection, or hope. But I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted to see her crumble, to witness her complete and utter defeat. I wanted her to beg for mercy, to plead for forgiveness. I started appearing to her in unexpected places, fleeting glimpses in crowds, shadowy figures lurking in the periphery of her vision. I would whisper her name in the darkness, leave cryptic messages on her doorstep, send her flowers with no note. Anya, already on edge, was terrified. She was convinced that she was being stalked, that someone was watching her every move. She became afraid to leave the house, afraid to answer the phone, afraid to even look out the window. Her paranoia reached a fever pitch. She started seeing me everywhere, in the faces of strangers, in the reflections in mirrors, in the rustling of leaves in the wind. She was losing her grip on reality, her mind spiraling into a vortex of fear and delusion. I watched her descent into madness with a cold, detached satisfaction. I had broken her, shattered her spirit, destroyed her life. She was mine now, a puppet dancing to the strings of my revenge. The time had come for the final act, the culmination of my plan. I would reveal myself, expose my machinations, and watch as Anya's world came crashing down around her. It would be a spectacle of despair, a symphony of suffering, a masterpiece of revenge. The stage was set. Anya, a prisoner in her own home, was a shell of her former self, consumed by fear and paranoia. Her career was in ruins, her friends had abandoned her, her finances were depleted, and her sanity was hanging by a thread. It was time for the grand finale, the unveiling of the puppet master. I chose a quiet evening, the house shrouded in an eerie silence. Anya was in her room, no doubt huddled in the darkness, her mind racing with fear and suspicion. I walked slowly towards her door, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I paused for a moment, savoring the anticipation, the thrill of the impending confrontation. I knocked softly, the sound sharp and unexpected in the quiet house. Anya gasped, her voice a mixture of fear and surprise. "Who is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me," I said, my voice calm and measured. "Mark." The door creaked open, revealing Anya's pale and frightened face. Her eyes were wide with terror, her body trembling. "Mark," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you," I said, stepping into the room. Anya backed away, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Talk about what?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "About everything," I said, my voice hardening. "About your affair, about your lies, about your betrayal." Anya's face crumpled. "I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising in anger. "I know everything. I've seen the video, I've read the emails, I've heard the conversations." Anya's eyes widened in horror. "You know?" she whispered, her voice choked with fear. "Of course I know," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "I've known all along." Anya's body slumped, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm going to make you pay," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I'm going to make you suffer the way you made me suffer." Anya's eyes filled with tears. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with the consequences." I stepped closer to Anya, my eyes fixed on hers. She cowered before me, her body trembling, her spirit broken. "You're going to lose everything," I said, my voice a low growl. "Your career, your friends, your money, your sanity. You're going to be left with nothing but the ashes of your own destruction." Anya's face contorted in despair. "No," she moaned, her voice a wail of anguish. "Please, no." I smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "Yes," I said, my voice filled with satisfaction. "Yes, Anya, you're going to pay." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Anya alone with her despair, her future a bleak and desolate landscape. My revelation, the unveiling of my role in Anya's downfall, was met with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and horror. She stared at me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, her mind struggling to comprehend the depth of my deception. "You?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was you all along." I nodded, a grim satisfaction spreading through me. "Yes, Anya," I said, my voice cold and hard. "It was me." Anya's face contorted in anguish. "But why?" she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "Why would you do this to me?" "Why?" I repeated, my voice rising in anger. "Because you betrayed me. You lied to me. You cheated on me." Anya's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice choked with remorse. "I never meant to hurt you." "Sorry," I scoffed, my voice dripping with contempt. "Sorry isn't enough. You destroyed my life, Anya. You took everything from me." Anya's body slumped, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I did. And now," I said, my voice hardening, "it's time for you to pay." I laid out my revenge in detail, describing each step of my plan, each calculated move, each deliberate act of cruelty. I recounted how I had undermined her career, alienated her friends, and drained her finances. I revealed how I had manipulated her emotions, exploited her vulnerabilities, and driven her to the brink of madness. Anya listened in stunned silence, her eyes wide with horror, her mind reeling from the magnitude of my betrayal. She had thought she was the victim, but now she realized that she was the pawn in a much larger game, a game orchestrated by the man she had once loved and trusted. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice filled with loathing. "Perhaps," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But you made me this way. You turned me into a monster." Anya shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "No," she said, her voice weak but resolute. "I didn't make you do anything. You chose to do this." You chose to hurt me. Maybe so, I said, my voice softening slightly. But you gave me the reason. You gave me the motivation. Anya looked at me, her eyes searching mine. And what about now? She asked, her voice trembling. What happens now? Now, I said, my voice hardening again. You face the consequences of your actions. You lose everything. You become nothing. Anya's face crumpled in despair. No, she moaned, her voice a wail of anguish. Please no. I turned away, my heart hardening against her pleas. It's too late for that, I said, my voice cold and final. Good boy, Anya. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving Anya alone with the wreckage of her life, the bitter fruit of her betrayal. The aftermath of my confession was a blur of activity. Anya, in a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of her life, tried to fight back. She contacted lawyers, threatened to expose me, and even attempted to rally her remaining friends to her side. But it was too late. The damage was done. Her reputation was in tatters, her credibility shattered. No one believed her anymore. Her lawyers, sensing a losing battle, advised her to settle. Her friends, weary of the drama and unsure of who to trust, distanced themselves. Anya, once a vibrant and connected woman, was now truly alone. She was forced to sell our house, the house we had built together, the house that held so many memories, both happy and painful. She moved into a small apartment, a stark contrast to the luxurious life she had once enjoyed. Her career was irreparably damaged. The scandal had followed her, her name synonymous with infidelity and deceit. She was unable to find a job in her field, forced to take on menial work to make ends meet. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals was now serving coffee and cleaning toilets. Her financial situation deteriorated rapidly. The money I had siphoned off was long gone, spent on frivolous expenses and hidden away in offshore accounts. She was struggling to pay her rent, her bills piling up, her credit rating plummeting. Her mental health, already fragile, continued to deteriorate. She was plagued by anxiety, insomnia, and panic attacks. She was haunted by nightmares, flashbacks of our confrontation, visions of her ruined life. She was a shadow of her former self, a ghost haunting the ruins of her own existence. I watched her downfall from afar, a detached observer of my own creation. I felt no remorse, no pity, no regret. I had achieved my goal. I had destroyed Anya, just as she had destroyed me. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, a strange emptiness began to grow inside me. The satisfaction of revenge, once so potent, began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache, a sense of something missing. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. I had destroyed Anya, but in doing so, I had also destroyed myself. I was alone, isolated, cut off from the world I had once known. The house was empty, the silence deafening. The memories of our life together, once a source of comfort, now haunted me like ghosts. I had achieved my revenge, but at what cost? Life had become a monotonous routine, devoid of joy or purpose. I went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but there was no spark, no passion, no meaning. The victory over Anya felt hollow, a Pyrrhic victory that had left me with nothing but ashes. The silence of the house was oppressive, a constant reminder of Anya's absence. I wandered through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The furniture we had chosen together, the artwork we had collected, the photos we had displayed, all seemed like relics from a forgotten past. I tried to distract myself, to fill the void with work, with hobbies, with meaningless encounters. But nothing worked. The emptiness persisted, a gaping hole in my soul. I started drinking heavily. The alcohol numbed the pain, dulled the memories, and provided a temporary escape from the reality of my situation. But the relief was fleeting, and the hangovers were brutal. I became a recluse, avoiding social contact, shunning the company of others. I had no one to talk to, no one to confide in, no one to share my burden with. I was alone, adrift in a sea of loneliness and despair. One night, in a drunken stupor, I found myself driving to Anya's apartment. I parked across the street and watched her through the window. She was sitting on the floor, her head in her hands, her body racked with sobs. I watched her for a long time, my heart aching with a mixture of pity and regret. I had destroyed her, broken her spirit, taken everything from her. And for what? For revenge? For justice? No, it was for nothing. My revenge had brought me no satisfaction, no closure, no peace. It had only brought me more pain, more loneliness, more emptiness. I started the car and drove away. The image of Anya's despair burned into my mind. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. I had destroyed Anya, but in doing so, I had also destroyed myself. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had become the very thing I had despised, the monster I had created. I was no better than Anya, no better than Mark. I was a betrayer, a liar, a destroyer. I pulled over to the side of the road and vomited, the alcohol and the guilt rising in my throat. I sat there for a long time, my head in my hands, my body racked with sobs. I had made a terrible mistake. I had let my anger and my pain consume me, blinding me to the consequences of my actions. I had sought revenge, but I had found only emptiness. I had lost everything. My wife, my friends, my home, my self-respect. I was alone, adrift in a sea of regret and remorse, and there was nothing I could do to change it. The story of my revenge was a cautionary tale, a warning about the destructive power of anger and the futility of vengeance. It was a story of loss, of betrayal, of the dark side of human nature. It was a story that I would carry with me for the rest of my life, a constant reminder of the price of hatred.